Hello there. We are very excited to present the first episode of Along These Lines. For nearly 2 decades, an extraordinary collection of World War I and World War II diaries and artefacts has been carefully gathered in a mission to preserve stories that might otherwise be lost to time. In an age of AI-generated content and fabricated history, everything you see here is real. The words, the handwriting, the emotions, and of course, my voiceover. However, we use AI voices to help bring the diaries and documents to life.
Everywhere lay the unspeakable horrors of war.
In this episode, we delve into the experiences of 3 World War I veterans who returned to the trenches decades after the war. Our first story begins with a currently unidentified soldier from the 9th Royal Fusiliers, who left us with an annotated photo album from his trip to the French battlefields in April 1928, 10 years after the war ended. Using this photo album, we're able to recreate the path that he took. His first stop was the city of Arras, where the Great Offensive began in April 1917. Then he moved to Monchy-le-Preux, the shattered ridge his battalion fought to capture. Then to Gonnelau, near Cambrai, where the new tanks broke through the German lines. Then Beaumont Hamel, the scene of the Somme's terrible opening day. And finally, Vimy Ridge, the high ground that came to symbolize both victory and loss. All places our soldier once knew as battlefields. The first stop on our veterans' journey was the beautiful pre-war city of Arras. Its grand squares and elegant boulevards standing in poignant contrast to the devastation that befell the city during the course of the war. He writes,
Arras was a beautiful city, but this was known to troops as Barbed Wire Square. Field guns stood in these arches. Compare this page with that opposite.
The Battle of Arras that began on April 9th, 1917, was launched to break through the German defensive line, divert enemy forces from the French offensive, and regain ground using surprise, speed, and one very big secret.
In 1917, we lived in cellars 3 floors down in these squares.
Beneath the quiet streets lay a hidden city, a vast labyrinth where medieval quarries met military ingenuity. In 1917, New Zealand's tunnellers secretly expanded many ancient chalk caverns into a sprawling underground base, capable of housing 24,000 Allied troops, complete with electric lights, running water, a hospital, and even a functioning tram line, just meters from German positions. Entire battalions waited in eerie silence beneath the surface before erupting into battle at dawn on April 9th. As the battle raged, our veteran was positioned with the 9th Royal Fusiliers west of Monchy, advancing alongside the 12th Division toward the village. Now, as he walks across the same ground, he notes,
Some thousands of lives were lost in the terrible fighting in and around this village. Dead men and horses lay on the road for months. It was impossible to bury them, and water had to be fetched from the wells by night, but few returned with it. And this is what it looks like today.
The group concluded their tour of the village with a look at the Newfoundland Memorial, which honours one of the regiment's most heroic actions of the war. On April 14th, 1917, during the Battle of Arras, roughly 10 officers and 100 other ranked Newfoundlanders managed to hold the eastern edge of the village against overwhelming German forces until reinforcements arrived. Only a handful of men were still standing when relief came, and it's only fitting that the memorial still stands proud today. After leaving the village, he made his way to Sonnet Farm, near Gonnelau, which was part of the Cambrai offensive, where the 12th Royal Fusiliers had taken heavy losses.
The Battle of Cambrai, November 20th, 1917. I took part in the capture of this farm. This is all we could find of the farmhouse and the buildings on the Perron-Cambrai road.
The battle initially saw British forces push deep into German-held territory, breaching the heavily fortified Hindenburg Line. However, without sufficient infantry and artillery support, the gains were short-lived. The 9th Royal Fusiliers were heavily involved, fighting through relentless artillery barrages and counter-offensives. Looking at his photo album, we can see that he moved on to Gonalou, part of the larger Battle of Cambrai. Gonalou was one of the critical points where British forces, including the 9th Royal Fusiliers, faced relentless assaults as they attempted to hold their positions. As he revisited the village, he noted,
"We attacked from trenches in front of this rebuilt church and school."
In another image, the veteran stands with his comrades outside the school, a quiet landmark that still stands nearly a century later. Next, he travels to Beaumont Hamel, a village that saw some of the fiercest fighting in the Somme campaign. He and his comrades explored old trenches, wearing rusted helmets and handling relics from the past. In a moment of levity, he joked,
"I made a good corpse."
after pretending to be shot. It is here, on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the 1st Newfoundland Regiment prepared to go over the top. In under 30 minutes, nearly 90% of the regiment was killed, wounded, or missing. Of the 801 men who went over, only 68 answered roll call the next day. Entire generations from small Canadian Newfoundland communities were devastated. They can be seen here only hours before the disastrous attack unfolded. Our veterans' final stop was Vimy Ridge, but we'll be coming back to that later. Next, we turn to Lance Corporal Ernest Harold Yeatman of the 12th Gloucestershire Regiment. He returned to the battlefields in April 1930. From his diary, we see his journey began near Maricourt, where the 12th Gloucesters were positioned at the start of the Somme offensive. He followed the line of advance across the open fields to Caterpillar Valley and on to Longueval, then past the infamous Delville Wood, the scene of brutal fighting in 1916. He continued on to Fresnoy, where his battalion faced relentless counterattacks in 1917, and finally to Vimy Ridge, where the Great Canadian Memorial towered above the landscape. Harold Yeatman writes in his diary,
Our driver, mistaking his way, took us on to Maricourt. This village was the place where we first entered the trenches in December 1915.
It was an experience that marked the beginning of his wartime service and his journey back to the trenches.
Passing on up to Montauban, we stopped again and proceeded to walk down into Caterpillar Valley, or the Valley of Death, as it used to be called. Except for a British cemetery and the trenches having been filled in, we found it all as we had left it in July 1916. And we could well imagine ourselves back again when we were shelled out of this particular place.
Caterpillar Valley was a deep depression used by British and Dominion troops as a staging ground during the Battle of the Somme. It was constantly swept by German artillery from the surrounding ridges, hence its name among soldiers as the Valley of Death, a place where few men passed twice.
Many skulls and bones of horses lay about in this valley.
It was from this valley that the remains of an unknown New Zealand soldier were taken to be laid to rest in the tomb of the unknown warrior in Wellington, representing all who never came home. And as Yeatman proceeded along the valley, they eventually went up the same track that in September 1916 took them to their frontline positions near Delville Wood. Yeatman described a poignant moment of remembrance.
When we reached the crossroads at Longueval, we saw the memorial cross to our battalion erected at this crossroads, and a wreath was placed upon it by one of our party. As we all stood there in the brilliant sunshine with bowed heads, we heard a lark singing up in the clouds and filling everything with its song. We seemed to be encompassed about with the spirits of our comrades who had passed on. They seemed to be there with us.
From there, they passed through Delville Wood, a place forever etched into South African memory. In July 1916, the 1st South African Infantry Brigade was ordered to hold the wood at all costs. For 6 days, they clung to it under relentless fire. Of the 3,153 men who entered, only 750 walked out. The wood itself, scarcely a kilometre in size, was smashed by an estimated 400 shells per minute, until it became less a forest than a tangle of splintered stumps. Yeatman sheds light on the battlefield.
The wood itself is full of debris of all kinds left exactly as it was. Barbed wire, old rifles, rusty bombs, steel helmets, unexploded shells, and equipment covered the ground and mingle with the numerous old tree trunks. There is not a single tree left of the old original wood.
The following day, they made their way to Fresnoy. One of Yeatman's most striking moments came when he stood once again on his old front line, which he had occupied during the Arras offensive.
With the aid of a map, we could tell exactly where our front line was on May 5th, 1917. And hereabouts we found traces of our old trenches and dugouts.
Yeatman's memories transported him back to those harrowing days.
The sunken road seemed very familiar to us, and we could imagine ourselves forming up again for a counter-attack, as we did on May 8th, 1917, after being driven out of Fresnoy.
Harold Yeatman's journey also ended with a trip to Vimy Ridge, something we'll pick up later on. A third veteran, an unknown Canadian soldier, visited the battlefields in April 1937. By looking at his diary, we see that he began in Toul, a quiet garrison town on the Meuse, where British troops trained alongside the French. From there, he moved to Lagny, once a rear area village turned supply hub during the early fighting in 1915. He then stood at the Trench of Bayonets, where a French regiment was entombed during the 1916 battle. His journey also ended at Vimy Ridge. His diary entries vividly capture the transformation of these sites.
We decided to take the train to Toul, and here we are. We ran into a taxi driver who was an American ex-soldier, and we hired him to drive us to Lagny, where Clarence was stationed near the end of the war. It proved another disillusionment for him. The two old ladies he lived with are gone, and the village indescribably filthy.
As he continued his journey, he arrived at the Trench of Bayonets near Verdun, an extraordinarily solemn memorial site that stood frozen in time. The story goes that in 1919, Colonel Calais, commander of the French 137th Infantry Regiment, returned to the battlefield where his unit had fought and discovered bayonets protruding from the ground, marking the final resting place of soldiers buried alive under tons of earth during an intense artillery barrage. Our veteran writes about the experience.
Twisted and rusted rifles and bayonets, still protruding from the ground as mute reminders of the many men who died at their posts. It was the most moving thing I had yet seen.
Later in his diary, he describes visiting Vimy Ridge, a key moment for Canadian forces in 1917. His entries describe the battlefield as it stood years later, and a place forever changed by war.
Words fail me to describe the utter desolation of that scene compared to what we had seen before. The ground had been literally churned to bits. It moved me as Verdun had not. Partly, perhaps because boys I had known had lived and died in this hill.
It was here that Canadian soldiers demonstrated incredible determination and sacrifice, securing a landmark victory that became a defining moment in their history. The battle saw over 10,000 Canadian casualties, with more than 3,500 killed as they fought to capture the ridge from German forces. Walking through the trenches at Vimy, the Canadian soldier described the contrast between German and Canadian lines.
We went into the German trenches, left as they were when they were pushed back. A trench mortar was still in place. At one spot, a rusted machine gun still mounted at the ready.
In the Canadian trenches, he marveled at their sophistication.
The most intricate system of underground tunnels of which you could conceive. They extended for 7 miles underground and even connected villages. The walls, waist high, were rubbed smooth from our boys' rucksacks as they came and went. Very frequently you saw the words in memory of, followed by a name, and the number and regiment that some soldier had carved for a buddy who had gone west. Clarence and I were really tied up in knots inside when we got out of there.
It's interesting to note that all three veterans visited Vimy Ridge, highlighting the significance this place held. Harold Yeatman recalls,
Shell holes and mine craters covered the earth, and the remains of a British aeroplane was even seen in the original no man's land of 1917. While exploring the trenches there, we experienced a unique thrill as we heard the sound of bursting shells. The old sound seemed very familiar to us all, and upon inquiry, we heard that it was a number of old shells being collected, being exploded by means of a fuse.
the Fusiliers veteran also reflected on the site.
The destruction of property is little compared with that of human beings.
The journey concluded with a stop to the Vimy Memorial, where the Canadian soldier visited a friend's grave.
Poor dear Bob. It was hard to leave him there, so far away from home. I feel very low in spirits tonight. I could cry my heart out for Bob and the 63,000 dead at Vimy.
The veterans' accounts not only expose the horrors of war, but also illuminate the deep, unbreakable bonds of remembrance that tied them to these battlefields. From Cambrai to Vimy Ridge, their stories remind us of the resilience of those who endured the unimaginable.
This tour will, for many years to come, be remembered as a happy reunion of the men who had fought over the ground together and who were now traveling together in peace over the same roads, paying tribute to those comrades who never returned.
Thanks for watching the very first episode of Along These Lines. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history, check out our channel trailer, where we share more about our mission to uncover and preserve the untold stories hidden within this vast collection of diaries and artefacts. This really is the beginning of an epic journey with some incredible stories to research and share. So please do like, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.